So tonight, Donna,
My job.
she told me I was muted. We're gathered together. Thank you for turning out on a beautiful Tuesday evening, with folks online as well. Fran, Marge, Amy, Wally, Frederica, and Charlene, and others may join as well. So thank you for being part of this. And out here, you can see who's gathered here.
Did you say March, did you?
It says Marge.
Yeah.
Fran, there you go.
Yeah, you got it.
So, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, she is with us. So let's begin with prayer.
Is your cup in the way?
Pardon?
Your cup. Is it
In the way of prayer?
Prayer well.
Oh.
The Lord be with you. Let us pray. We give thanks, O God, for your words spoken in our hearts, through our experience, through our journey of faith, and especially in the words of one another as we've listened to each other's experience, as we've been open to learning what we don't know, learning what we thought we knew, and learning how others experience it. Thank you for walking with us in this journey, for being the journey itself, for meeting us where we go, and for guiding and directing us now as we continue to listen and continue to offer our whole selves to the work that you're doing within us and through us and around us. Pray this tonight and into the coming days. In Christ's name.
Amen.
Again, thank you for creating this circle. We're going to spend 90 minutes or so talking first about our own experience, you could say, in the last year or 2 years or 5 years, or however long you feel like you've been at this work of listening and then listening again to the experience of others, or especially the other, people who have been othered in society. Some of us have been doing this just in earnest over the past year with the 3, soon to be 4 circles of sacred ground. We did this with focus during Lent, with the preparing to become beloved community gathering. And then some of you have been doing this in the Race and Social Justice Coalition for 6 years now? 7? Yeah.
That's a 1007.
And how many books have you been through?
Oh.
In the 20s? Right.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of learning that's been happening. And one of the things that we're learning as we learn is that never ends. It's not like, as I think Ranjit said, there's no boxes that you check off and say, okay, I did that. It just opens up deeper places. And because what Buddhists call beginner's mind, that the real masters just say, no, I'm just beginning. That's all there ever is, that fresh, new, now experience and exploration. So one of the things that has been happening all along the way is that individuals have been saying, what are we going to do next? Or we should do X. And there have been lots of great ideas. So this is a chance to start to hear those ideas spoken into the circle and captured so that they aren't like confetti thrown up in the air that falls on the ground and doesn't go anywhere. And what we will do with what we hear tonight and what gets added to the list, because it'll never stop getting added to, this isn't like a seal on after tonight, is that we, and I'm just going to mean this the whole collective, but there'll be folks who opt into this work specifically will say, okay, we heard a lot. We got 120 ideas. What do we do with those? I think maybe I'll just save save more of what that might look like to the end of the meeting. Where we're going to start though, is instead of by, popcorning all those ideas, we'll get to that. That's going to be the bulk of tonight's meeting. We'll start by taking whatever time we need, up to about 20-25 minutes to reflect on where we've been in the last year or plus around this topic and in our own hearts. Especially, I'm going to reach for that question. So, Marcia, I'm suddenly realizing I didn't do this. Marcia, if you can, could you put in the chat or find a way to get to the online folks these questions? They're going to be really easy. You're not going to be at a disadvantage for not having this paper. I handed this out. So I'll read this question. There's two questions about for our reflection. And what Marcia's going to do is
It's in the chat.
when people, okay, it's in the chat.
It's already-
She's already there.
Already.
Great. Marcia's way ahead of me.
Sorry.
Of course. I'm going to depend on Donna. I'm not going to be trying to read anything here. So
Donna should run the meeting.
we are doing this. Yeah, it's a group effort. So where there's contributions from online, they'll come through Donna. We can unmute. So
Yeah, she just texted me.
we'll pull everyone in.
Let's see what's going on.
So-
Okay, do.
For this first round of questions, we'll ask it and then be quiet for a minute and then just speak as you feel led and reflect in 90 seconds or less, and you can speak more than once. Just give everyone a chance to reflect. Where has God continually focused and refocused your attention? What keeps coming back to you in the Becoming Beloved community meetings, or the sacred groundwork you've done, or your own reading, or just your living and experiencing on this journey? What's come back again and again? That's one question. And the other is, where and how do we want to help? What do we want to do to help our congregations see differently or do differently because of what we've heard? So first question is about how has this affected you? And the second is, how would you like to see it affect us? And this is not I think we should, ... It's a step back from that. We'll get to the specific ideas next, but how do you want it? What do you want to see? What do you want us to see differently or do differently? Big picture question. Let's take a minute of quiet, and then floor is open. Let's share our experience of what has kept coming up for you and what you would like to see us do and be coming out of this. Listen to one another, prepare to be surprised. Listen especially for what catches your attention that you agree with or don't agree with, and just notice that and see if you can make a little bit more space for it. This is the beautiful thing about a meeting like tonight is there's no crosstalk. There's no arguing, there's no right or wrong. This is just gathering and noticing. It's one of those really privileged times and places where it's just wide open. So how would you answer those questions? What comes up? And I'll just raise your hand if you, so and I'll be watching, so I can just, you know, keep us teed up, land the planes, Kate.
Oh, no, I wasn't.
Oh, Gail. So Gail then done.
I think what comes up for me, is that in every one of these learnings, what is stressed is the fact that this is work that has to be done at several levels, individually, collectively, that we need shared language in order to address things, and in order to understand each other better. And that it is not work that is done in a week or a month, that it takes years. That it's a journey and that everybody is at a different stage in that journey. That to me is what I see coming back each time.
Don and then Susan.
As most of you know, Kate and I have just been coming here actually on a regular basis for less than a year. So we don't have a long history with St. Paul's. We moved here from Monroe, just close enough so that we can go back occasionally. And in fact, we're coming up on our third straight Sunday, not being here, but being there. That's an anomaly though. But when we moved here, we were seeking community. Kate had some work colleagues, so that helped, but church has always been important. And it was, I have felt like a kid in a candy store for the last year. Just having discovered this place. And, you know, when I think about community, I think that community building takes time. And it takes multiple events, opportunities, multiple interactions. And, you know, programmatically, St. Paul's has so much going on that we have come to this place so many times over the last year. I think that for me, that has been a rich opportunity in many ways. But I think also, you know, just to have such a robust program of worship and other activities like the Lenten thing down here, you know, all of those are potentially rich community building experiences. And you know, I think that's one thing that St. Paul's has done very well in this last year, something I've benefited from. And something I look forward to continuing.
Thank you, Susan.
Well, I'm following two people who are extraordinarily articulate, and I'm a person of fewer words. But I was going to say that we're on a journey that's never ending anyway. I mean, it's not going to end. It's a process that's going to continue, probably as long as there are people in this world. For me, and I think I'm not speaking for people in the current sacred ground, which is not ended, but it's been a paradigm shift in the sense that whereas some of us knew some things before intellectually, we have felt them so impactfully. I've had to discuss reading all, novels or alternative material to sort of to support me in terms of adjust my mood. The fact that so much evil and terrible disparity among people in our country, whether it's the people who've been the enslaved and the people who descended from the enslaved, or the Native Americans whose land we stole, or Asian Americans who were incarcerated. so much damage has been done. I mean, there's a genuine original sin of slavery and treating other people as the other. And I have some ideas for things I'd like to work on next year, but which we won't talk about now, but there's so much work to be done to end the terrible divisions in this nation and the problems that there is, and not seeing us as God's children, all of us in this country, but as some people as the other.
Thank you, Anthony.
Well, I think culturally, like St. Paul's has always described our, congregation as a congregation that welcomes everyone. And I think genuinely, St. Paul's, as long as I've been coming here, always has been a very welcoming place, or has made its best effort to be welcoming to everyone. And has tried to, do better over the years, and we've gotten better. St. Paul's has changed a lot in the time I've been here. But at the same time, I think, it's obvious to me that also, like, especially when I started coming here 12 or 13 years ago, and even up until more recently, like St. Paul's was always also a very Anglican church that celebrated, Anglican white Episcopal culture. Or other like white Episcopal traditions, like the Celtic tradition. And so it was like welcoming everyone, but centering that Anglican whiteness and celebrating, that tradition of the Episcopal Church. And I think, I'd like to see St. Paul's as a church, and educating our congregation and, widening this conversation, refocus our church on the fact that we are an Episcopal church of the USA, not of the Anglican church in England, and that we need to represent all of the cultures of our own country, and we need to celebrate Black heritage and history in our country and culture, and that, the fact that we just had our first Juneteenth celebration last year, I believe, is like kind of crazy to me, because I feel like we should be on like our 7th or 8th year at this point, just like we are with Pride. I'm happy that we're on our 2nd year now celebrating Juneteenth, because that should be as much as a part of our culture here at St. Paul's as Pride is, and the other days that we celebrate throughout the year as a community. So I think it's really important, is like looking at our culture and saying, like, how are we still centering that whiteness in our church? And, how can we do better?
Thank you. It's often said, when you look at the worldwide Anglican communion, the average Anglican is a Black woman because of Africa, which far outnumbers the rest of the communion. So we haven't done a good job of really paying attention to what Anglican and worldwide Anglican identity looks like. You look to the islands,
They're dominant.
And not in the United States.
No, it depends on where you are in the country. We've got
Yeah.
lots of vibrant African-American churches, Caribbean American churches, but this is a historical conversation that's outside this time. Sharon's nodding her head. There were some really awful moments in the Episcopal Church's history where Absalom Jones is one of them, where basically people of color had to go elsewhere. They were literally up in the slave galleries or couldn't be ordained.
It happened in this church too.
Oh, yeah.
They told to go somewhere else.
Right. I'm facilitating, but also participating. I want to say one of the things that's kept coming up for me has been just what Elaine said, the stories that I have heard that are just, they're not secrets, but they're kind of like open secrets. How people of color had been treated in the past, or even not in the too distant past. That kind of like, well, you might be more comfortable elsewhere, or I think Estella's story of like, well, it's okay that you're here, just don't bring your friends.
Yeah.
I want to go back to
what Don said about the deep welcome he has felt here and the sense of community. And all the things going on. And I absolutely treasure that. And as I've gone through Sacred Ground and Race and Social Justice, sometimes I feel a real disconnect between what we have going here, which is so great, and the suffering just at our doorsteps. And I know that in the hearts of all the congregation, we want to do more to bridge that divide, to bring people in, to share what we have. And that's the quest that I'm feeling right now.
Come on.
Yeah, I'll pick up on the theme that people are talking about. March, my wife and I came about 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the first sermon was given by an author whose book we have read in the Wednesday group, Kelly Brown Douglas. Now, Kelly Brown Douglas does not withhold any punches. She's a Black woman and she speaks from a Black perspective. And she speaks with great conviction and has moved me. For those of you who didn't hear my song and dance, she asked the white congregation, how many times do you talk about race? And I don't know what people said to themselves, but I said to myself, I rarely talk about race with my friends. And since that moment, I have been involved in the Wednesday group. And so that has drawn me. That may turn off people, that has drawn me. And in preparation for this gathering tonight, I asked myself, what have I learned from Sacred Ground? And part of what I've learned is coming from the Wednesday group, and there are people in this room with whom I have been in both groups. Theology scared me when I was at seminary. I went to seminary for a year and I was so turned off by anyone talking about theology. I said, can't handle this. So I spent a year in the seminary and then left. But Howard Thurman has made sense of theology for me. And that's one of the books that we have been reading. And he talks about, he says, Jesus. Who was Jesus? Jesus, first of all, was a Jew. And a Jew was not respected in the Roman Empire. In fact, Jews were enemies. He was a poor Jew. And he was a member of a minority sect. And he had to make his own way.
But he was white.
Sorry?
Conducting the race here, he was white.
Well, race was really important
I
because
didn't think he was white.
he was not white. He
was not-
probably was he was a person of color. But how would we know that? When we look at all the images of Jesus, my daughter, she loves Jesus. She's a Jesus person. And she put a picture of Jesus up where our family pictures were, and sure it probably made her feel good. But it's the white Jesus. So Thurman says, he talks about the minority. Jesus was a member of the minority. What were, Thurman asked, what were the strategic alternatives against fighting against the status quo? And the first choice that Thurman mentions, is it just you avoid the question? Okay, it's so easy to someone say, well, you know, something is controversial, just avoid the question. A second choice that Jesus faced was he could resist. And what power would a poor Jew have resisting in the Roman Empire? Very little. So Thurman says it was a third choice that Jesus made. And Jesus appealed to another authority. The Romans, the army couldn't criticize him. And he said, the kingdom of heaven is in us. Now, how can the Roman authorities fight against that? So Thurman talks about the skill and the procedure of fighting against that. Okay, I want to make another reference to Thurman. Thurman's grandmother, who was a slave, refused to hear anything from the letters of Paul. St. Paul, right? St. Paul, the saint for which we name our church. Why would grandmother not want to hear anything from Paul? Because Paul's quote, and I don't know, Daniel, you'll know where this is. He says, slaves, be obedient to your masters as are your masters unto Christ. 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 times during the year, grandmother would have to hear that as a young kid. She said, don't tell me about St. Paul. Well, fortunately, we all don't have that issue, but St. Paul was a citizen. He was a Jew, and he dealt with the issue. So I am drawn to race and social justice, surprisingly, through this Black theologian who is making these incredibly perceptive comments. And how often do we hear people say, oh, I can't answer that question. I'm just tongue-tied. And Thurman says, face it, get with the program. So I think that's a sufficient use of my notes to say that by reading in the Sacred Ground, I have been very moved by him, and he has moved me, and I'll end up with a quote from Madeline, who was our Yale seminarian. And she started her sermon about a month ago saying, I want you to know that I've got a very difficult question for you, a very difficult subject. And she went on to say that in her theology class at Yale that week, the professor had said, what are you waiting for? And that's a question I'm asking for St. Paul's, for all of us. What are we waiting for? If we think there's justice to be had through theology or through philosophy, let's get with it. So I'll leave you with that. What are we waiting for? So that's what something I've learned.
I can tell you went to seminary. Preach it. So, before we tip into the next part of our evening together, if there's anybody online that has anything they want to contribute of what's kept coming back to you over these last months, years, however long you've been at this, what keeps knocking at your heart? Or what do you hope for St. Paul's, or what we can be and do together? I'm not looking away from you. So Sharon, and then anybody online, just either raise your hand or put it in the chat. It'll get into the room. We won't move on without you. Oh, was that? Sharon, was that did you raise your hand?
Sure,
Okay,
yes.
go, yeah.
And I'm Sharon Pearson.
Yeah.
I don't worship at St. Paul's. But I've been working with the History Project Group. I live in Norwalk. And I'm part of St. Matthew's at Wilton Social Justice Group. And so for me personally, so I did Sacred Ground with them, a variety of different things. I've been with the Wednesday group from time to time. We meet on Wednesday nights too. For me personally, and I've been on doing this work because this is really hard work for a long time in lots of different capacities. And most recently for me, it's learning more truth. I taught American history, many former lives ago, and I didn't teach it. I didn't learn it myself. And I believe we teach what we know and what we learn. And so to me, that truth telling and seeking and listening to one another is essential for all of this. Had my hands in a lot of things with St. Matthew's, and we sort of see ourselves as planting seeds. We're a really small group doing this, and we're a pretty white. We are a white congregation. Every now and then there's people of color that come, but not very often. And I struggle with that a lot. So that's one of the reasons that I've realized, besides living in Norwalk and knowing and getting to know a number of you really well, that I'm committed to doing, to doing that more with you. Because I love history and I love doing research and that kind of stuff. But also for me, collaboration is really important. And I think we are, as Christians, whatever, we are better when we work with each other and not work in silence. Yeah.
I just want to say to that point, because being part of the History Project, the difference that it has made with Sharon in it, because she can share with us in a way and collaborate with us in a way that we would not have collaborated before. When they were doing their witness stone, which they just put in the ground, they had paid for it, most of it, but they invited us in. And we came in with what little we had. And what was amazing was we had a whole family. The Hans went there and their children were able to benefit from that training in the same way I benefited from that training. Because and it was just the one, I remember the very first one we went to, where one of the things we were learning was how to look at documents that had to do with slavery, and learning little things like, how do you know when you look at this list of goods and services that there is somebody there who is enslaved? And you knew from the fact that they were put as servant, and they were put with dogs and cats and whatever else, and whatever other things of property they were property. So they were listed as property on ships that went to Guildford, and so we began to really see, the real people in real places in the state of Connecticut, and if you had asked some people, they would say, well, I don't think there was much slavery in Connecticut. You look at the numbers, there was a point in time when we had the largest numbers, you know, so it's little. And who brought that to us? Sharon brought that to us. You know, how to look at letters, you know, how to look at the fact that when somebody, this woman, for example, who I still have in my brain, she was a priest's wife. And, you know, the priest had said, look, I'm bequeathing my enslaved persons, and I would like to set them free. And she in her wisdom decided that, well, yes, but not their children. You know, we want to better their children and we know best. And therefore, we would like to keep their children in perpetuity enslaved for their betterment. And one of the things he said to us, look at letters, look at well-intentions and see them for what they are, which is racist. You know, and those were things you couldn't, you had to learn, you know, and again, collaboration.
The training Gail's talking about is, as part of the Witness Stones project, folks who participated in it, especially it was geared toward kids, learning how to do primary research, meaning you're not going to find it in the textbook. You got to go searching through old documents and start to piece these things together, and learning how to do that kind of work. The kids were the ones that actually found the information around the person that you honored, and anyone who's part of that project. So I'm so glad the Hans got to participate with you, and it will ripple out, because once you learn how to do primary research, it just keeps going.
Daniel, I went up to St. Matthews on Sunday. And I was so honored to be sitting next to this kid who's probably 12 or 13 years old. He's sitting there and said, oh, I just wrote a paper. And wow, it's cool. He had the paper written. He developed, created whatever fragment of history. He had done oral history and he had written a paper. That's pride. Now, how cool if we could all have pride in finding some discovery. So it was a really exciting moment for me to meet a real.
I'm happy to share those that I'll email it to some of you and you can spread around.
And I'll say, just as a witness, whenever I've dropped into the history group that's doing the work, everybody's excited, like they're all like little school kids, like, look what I found. It's actually really fun work. And it's hard. I mean, the things you're learning are appalling. So it's not like, it's not Candyland, but it feels like when you know more truth, that just feels like a better place to stand, and life gets richer. And so it's.
And what is interesting to see is how people on their own, as they're exploring this, will come up and say, well, we should be doing this. I think we should really be doing this, because it is exciting. I looked at kids learning all this stuff. I remember one little boy, remember the little boy who did the math?
Yeah.
I mean, he sat there and looked to see, he's like, how many voyages did they make? How many enslaved people did they, and he came up with all these numbers, and to me, that is where the learning comes. Because I think before you can do, you have to learn. Because in the same way, when I look at, and the other question that talks about, what do we want to help our congregation see differently?
Yes.
What I would like to help our congregation see differently is, though we are a wonderful, welcoming community, there's a lot that passes. There's a lot that doesn't happen, and I think and it doesn't happen because we don't do it consciously. The way we speak to another person, the way we address a person of color. Sometimes, and even in this day and age, there have been microaggressions addressed to people of color who are sitting in this room. you know, without people recognizing it as an issue.
Mhm.
And we need to get to the point where those things become important, where we build allies, where white people in this congregation see themselves as allies of people of color and do the standing up,
Mhm.
you know, do the coming forward. When I look at Sharon, that's what I see. That Sharon is an ally who works through, who doesn't just come to a meeting, but, you know, is constantly showing us, you know, how things are connected. You know, and I think that's how that to me is what I would love to see within our community.
So that's a great pivot point. I want to make, anything showing up, Donna? Is anybody? Just shout out anytime you have a comment online, folks. So I want to pivot us because you're going right there, to start to say, all right, as we have been feeling and hearing ways in which we feel called to be and do, when you know better, do better, as Maya Angelou says. What are some of those things that have been percolating for you? Now, again, I want to, in the 50 minutes or so we're going to give ourselves now, to really discipline ourselves to when you hear something, this is not a time for crosstalk. You can amplify it, or you can ask for clarification, but it's really just a time to let it all in the room. It's also not a time to think, to edit, meaning don't think about whether we've got the money or the people or any of the capacity to do that. That's what we'll do next. You know, that will happen. Now is the time just to speak as specifically as you can. Like, I'd love for you to go next, Gail, to just say, what would you like to see happen? Like, what, put it to event. You know, I would like an event where in a safe space, we can hear about what some of those microaggressions are.
Yeah.
And some of the white folks can get trained in ways that we're completely oblivious to say, oh, that's what they mean, you know, our Black friends mean when they say microaggression, and that's what's happening here now. I would love that moment. So now we have two scribes, Anthony and Ginny. You're gonna, yeah, you volunteered. You forgot that. It's really easy. So I have, I got flip, so we're gonna write on the pillars. I had a pocket full of pens. And Anthony's got one, but more there. Why you buy them by the bucket? So the reason there's two is only so that we can go as fast as we can. We're not meaning we're rushing, but just that we're not waiting for the scribes to finish writing. We'll just continue to flesh out our ideas. So you can start with the one I just said. I mean,
Microaggression.
of a session where in safe space, we start to hear some of those specifics.
And have that burden not be on Black folks,
Right.
to educate the white people.
Right, no, it's that they would be, you'd be speaking, Gail, from your own experience and others from their own experience. And again, it would be a small, this is not like broadcast, this is not recorded or, you know, just saying, let's try to crack this open and get into it.
Like we say in our Wednesday group, it's not our problem, we didn't create it,
No.
you fix it. Why are you looking for me to ask me, how do I solve it?
Well, that's the key, is the difference being not
I'm
solve
not
it.
the solver,
Yeah.
sorry.
Say it, we'll solve it, yeah. You got it.
I would like to
White
see
people.
a race and social justice group from St. Paul's. That's what I would like.
Mhm.
That's
And what do you mean when you say race and social justice?
meaning a group that looks at racial healing, justice and reconciliation, which I see as an arc.
Right.
And comes up with ideas to fight injustice, that looks at partnering with other groups to promote this work, and comes up with concrete things to promote in several areas. You have housing, you have education, you have immigration, you have a number of issues in which we can support.
Childcare.
So Ellen and,
What's popping up for me is a better method to have dialogue with people on specific issues rather than all the theory stuff. I mean, I'm sitting in a group of 90% white, with one person who's black in a group. And I'm thinking, how can I better engage for racial justice, people of different races? And maybe a term like microaggression would be a good topic, but it's third party, it's away from the people who will be impacted by racial justice. And I want to find a way to get closer to the real people who are impacted. Maybe it's in the community, it's not in our church necessarily. But that, I feel I was a minority in our groups here, because I'm part of the white, part of the dialogue, you know? And that's, I'm uncomfortable feeling that I have a position to take for something that I can do, without understanding what it's like to be on the other side. So somehow I'd like to bring in that community and dialogue. First party rather than third party. I know it may be difficult. You're not gonna go into the streets and find 10 black people to come into your group. But there's gotta be ways we can reach out to people and have those kind of discussions. I wish I had the answers.
we're covered with our questions. That's a good place to start. Donna,
I just want to make sure everybody also remembers that there are a lot of people in this church believe that, okay, we have a race and social justice coalition. We're doing, you know, the circles. We have all of this going on. Okay, we've done it. And no, we haven't. And I say this all the time because I was one of the ones that talks about microaggressions all the time because I hear it all the time. People will say things to me and they forget that I'm black. But they'll come out with something and I look at them, you do remember, you black, talking to a black woman. Oh, you know, but they think because we have the race and social justice, we're done.
Their job.
We are done. Check those boxes. You know, we fly the flag on the side of the house. We have the Black Lives Matter. We say we're progressive. We do all of those things. And that we are where we need to be. They don't understand or want to realize we have, if you think we've made this much inroads, no, hon, we've only made this much, we need to make this many more.
I think that's what Sacred Ground has taught us, what we don't know. You know,
and what I hear Donna saying is there's, you know, there's the we, there's larger circles of the we. You know, I'd like to add an idea to say, we're at circle 4 of Sacred Ground. To get to, you know, I'll throw out an ambitious goal to get to 8. So that, which will take a drive of everybody who's been in Sacred Ground to really talk to their.
We get to eat it. Congregation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Marva, then Susan.
So Danielle, what I'd like to see is that periodically, if it's 3 times a year or so, we have speakers come in specifically to speak to St. Paul's on race and social justice and what's happening out there and maybe how they're involved and maybe spark something in us on how we as a congregation can also get involved. So outside speakers.
Right. Yeah, beyond, take it beyond Juneteenth and MLK.
Yes.
And spirit right here. So who did I say? Susan, then Lamont.
Well, I was just gonna say, I love the idea of building the community out beyond this church and visiting other churches, small groups, asking other churches to come here, small groups. I think, celebrating at St. Monica's, Absalom Jones's birthday, you know, was very meaningful to me to go there. And, I was telling a few people-
Anthony, can you put that on the
Earlier.
wall? We're gonna spread them all across.
I just learned about, Paul Murray last night. I mean, I am so yes, wow, it's great. I was so embarrassed, but.
Yeah. No, I don't mean wow that you didn't know, but wow, what a life.
And,
Ellen Murray is,
and,
epic.
you know, asking other people to come in to learn about her, if you can find someone who, an historian who could talk about her. But I love the idea of bringing in Yeah, she's not. But
The
she
Episcopal
was doing things, and a poet and a writer, and one of the first freedom writers. I mean, she did not move from the back of the bus, who was arrested. But this was in the, what was it, early 40s, not in the
No,
60s.
but, yeah,
Yeah. She was a total groundbreaker. Anyway.
well,
We also have the option of, select, Marva's ideas, phrase. And I was thinking of, encouraging the vestry to, again, invite Kelly Brown Douglas. Also, I would suggest, sorry, I just blanked out. But if Kelly Brown Douglas comes, I think we need to, before she comes, make some, as a committee, make some way to implement what she says, not just speaking. Maybe a group, maybe a committee could come up with, maybe we could meet with her. I'm thinking of her as inspiring us to go further, but that's a black voice, and I think we need a lot of white voices. When I was out with you at the church, Bishop Curry apparently gave a fiery sermon about any violence. But I'm sure that he could, or other people could, give some fire and brimstone from a white preacher. Kelly Brown Douglas keeps talking about getting the faith leaders. That whole book, she keeps saying, get the faith leaders. We got to get faith leaders talking about this. Yeah, we all have to talk about it, but we need the dude up there in the pulpit to say, this is what we need to do.
Women as well in the.
For some reason.
Don't go with the dudes alone.
So we need some dudes, some white dudes.
Just to build on that, a number of years ago, we seemed to have this kind of a ecumenism kind of movement kind of thing. And I remember we all went down and we visited the temple. Synagogue. We went to the service at the synagogue and then they came here. And then I also remember when they built the mosque down on Mott Avenue there, and we were all invited to the open house there. Maybe that would be one way to start it with, the black churches, maybe the Congregational Church, the Baptist Church, the mosque, the temple. Maybe start with our church people. We started doing that, and then I don't know, I think, maybe the pandemic, I don't know what happened, but it sort of petered out a little bit. If we could get that going again, that might be an impetus to, bring all the community together.
Well, that's a great idea because that also piggybacks on the fact that a lot of them are involved in things like Malta House. There, when Daniel and I went there, we were invited. A lot of the people there were from other churches, so there are things that we can do, not just ecumenically, but as well with the diocese.
Sure.
Because the diocese has a huge racial and social justice group that looks after, that gives resources every month. They send out resources to parishes saying, here are stuff that's happening on race and justice that you can be involved with. They actually have there are two of us who are sitting right now in that group. So it's about making those connections. This week, we took part in the iconology project, which is why our Black Madonna has gone up to Hartford. And on the 20th, that is going to be an exhibition that's gone up. Stations of the Cross have gone up because they're looking at, what new icons can we offer? Talking about Black Jesus, putting Black Jesus out there. So that people can actually see it, looking at Sunday school, and having images that a child who is of Latinx background can walk into a church and see something that looks like them. So there are efforts happening at the diocesan level that we can be involved in. So that's why I'm saying we have to look at the levels. Individually, the work that you do, collectively, the work that we do as a congregation, and the work that we do ecumenically, and the work that we do at the level of the diocese. So we have several levels at which we can do work.
There are even tiny spots, like Sunday school, 2 weeks ago, we had photographs or images. And the kids picked out different images of what they thought. They were all very into it. It was really, but it was a tiny moment. Tiny moment. It was like,
There's an extraordinary organization called CMNCT, Congregations Organized for a New Connecticut. They are not just Christian, they're Jewish, Muslim, Sikh. And it is, they've got a lot of leverage in the state. I would love to see us get connected to Connect. There's a dues, but they're pretty flexible about it, but it just requires, again, somebody who's gonna say, I'll be the champion of that. I'll be the connector. But Connect is one, and then the other is Norwalk Acts. I was just at their quarterly convening today, amazing. And I'm on the implementation team of Norwalk Act, so I'm with them monthly, but they're really dialed into all the organizations in Norwalk that are organized around education, saying that is the key, starting cradle to career, working with the disadvantaged populations. A lot we could do with them.
At one point, we were also involved with Iris. which
Yep.
I think that was.
Iris, yep.
And we were involved with.
Siri is another one.
The immigrant,
Yeah.
that were coming in through Iris.
Yep.
And we got.
We were also involved with prison ministry, because that's how I got involved with prison ministry. Because when I came here, Elena Deli, I don't know if anybody remembers Elena Deli, but Ellie she was in charge of prison ministry. And because of Ellie, a lot of us joined, including Sandy, and the Mother Louise. So at one time we had 6 people on prison ministry. So it's about coming back to things like that.
There's three churches now are organizing and met several times. Trinity Southport, Christ and Holy Trinity Westport, and St. Paul's. Just to say, let's share ideas about what we're doing as individual churches and also together. Our last meeting, this extraordinary woman, Tahiba Baum, who started an organization called Women Against Incarceration. She had been incarcerated. She came with her ladies, as she called them, women who had been recently incarcerated. Extraordinary work. It just made me think, oh, St. Paul's would love to get involved with this.
I was gonna ask, I remember you mentioning that, you had met with them during the Lenten series, so.
Yeah, well, that's still out there, and everybody was just kind of enamored of, how can we support you? Oh,
One of the things I'm really impressed by at St. Paul is how many individuals are involved with really vital kind of change efforts, whether it's prison ministry, whether it's work with immigrants or whatever. And I think we need to find a way to hold that up, to celebrate that, and to use that to educate the rest of the congregation about what's possible. So I'd love to see, a Sunday forum once on 3 people involved with prison ministry and talking about what they've learned and stories that they've heard, because it's a way of bringing that back.
It's still your ministry.
Yeah.
It is,
Really?
it is. I mean, we just went back into business
Yep.
this Saturday, after 3 years. And one of the stories that struck me was this woman who had left, she'd been with him. And she's just gone back in there. Why? Because when you get released, you do not necessarily get released in a neighborhood that you know,
No, right.
or back to your community. So you're in a place where you know no one. You have no money, you're looking for a job and a place to live. And you have to reorient yourself to all the changes that have taken place. And one of the things she said was, I couldn't find a church. I couldn't find a church. And for me, that would have been such a lifeline, but I just couldn't find the church. And so you go back to what you know and what's easy.
I think about organizations like Family Reentry up in Ridgeway.
Exactly.
I would, and wonder if, I don't know if they ever reach as far as Norwalk, but is there a
Well,
way?
we go to them because I worked with them,
Mhm.
Family Reentry, and you had to go to them, but, you know, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
You know, it's not impossible, because you mentor children at risk. So that kids in the school system, you have several opportunities. You can mentor a child at school, where you go to the school and mentor a child at risk. Or you can mentor a child who is a juvenile and has either had a run-in with the law, and they're trying to help them, so they give them a mentor. But it's a really great program.
Hey, unmute yourself and go. The mic is live and loud.
Sorry, the conversation has moved on since I've raised my hand, and this is really just a variation on what you were talking about in collaboration and outside speakers and that sort of thing, that maybe consider like a preacher exchange within various churches in Norwalk, not necessarily if it's in a set, especially not Episcopal churches,
Right.
but to hear how the gospel is preached in other places.
That's a great idea. I've talked about doing that with Tamara. We haven't done that yet, but she's right across the green. I mean, it's that easy. So, yeah.
Also reach out to people with developmental disabilities. I know it's been so wonderful for us to have Connie and Wendy in church. And there are agencies that would like to hear that it would be welcoming to bring them back.
They need that, you know.
Person to person and laundry love are two things that we have real long commitments to. Not a lot of volunteers for, but again, some of that is just bringing the offer back and the invitation back in very specific ways, but those two can go on the list. Ellen and then Sandy and then.
A couple of years ago, I was involved in an organization that was counseling people who were released from prisons. So there was a lot of man-to-man talks, so to speak, about what it's like to re-enter the community. And the one thing that really got to me was the biggest issue of people going to prison and releasing prison is the lack of fathers, good and well parenting from fathers, especially men that don't feel they've got good, strong fathers. And so we started to develop programs about what do you do if you don't have a father? How do you get those attributes back in that love and that, the whole initiative spun off of them. It's so rewarding to get people, everyone was looking for a father. And they were just trying to get back into society. So we formed little mentoring groups, and a lot of mentoring groups and men. And it really helped people get back into society. So I'd be willing to get involved in that kind of an initiative.
What program was that through?
It was not a program.
If it was Fathers Helping Fathers.
Fathers Helping Fathers, I think it was.
Well,
Fathers
Fathers
Helping
Helping
Fathers.
Fathers.
It's in Bridgeport.
Okay, but Family Reentry also offers them, they offer trainings to fathers, for example, who have never, been parented themselves.
Right.
They offer them parenting classes, anger management classes.
The mentoring is so powerful beyond the classes, where you have a one-on-one mentor.
Sandy and then Don.
In our St. Ground Circle, we finished the session 10 on grief, reckoning, and repentance. And it was incredibly impactful for me. And, you know, Stephanie Spellers, and Mr. Brown, I believe, her consultant, Brenda Brown, pulled together notes for the facilitators on how to go about having this conversation. For me, feelings run so deep on this, and they're so individual and they're so personal. But if you don't deal with them, I'll quote from them. They say, if you don't take the time to acknowledge and honor the emotions and energy moving through your system, you risk minimizing the true depth of trauma and brokenness within and around us. It remains an idea instead of a reality. I wonder if we could ask Stephanie Spellers to come and facilitate a conversation like that, because I think that might be holding a lot of people back, because it's very real.
And done, right?
Yeah, I just, Paul's comment a few minutes ago, made me think as a, again, a relative newcomer here. I would benefit greatly if I knew who the people in this congregation, or where the people in this congregation volunteer their time. So that if I feel like I would like to get involved in, you know, work with homeless people, for instance, then I could go to the directory or go to your website and like, oh, this person is really involved with that. I can approach that person at coffee hour. Blah, blah, blah.
Great idea.
Great, yeah, so good.
Because I have tried on my own to do that, and I just sort of lost me because I was just going by myself.
You need a mentor.
I need a mentor, and, you know, I need a companion, you know, somebody else to do that with.
So let's exchange, I can help you a little bit after this, exchange some information. Let's not let that idea drop.
Yeah.
So you need momentum.
We used
More than happy to.
We used to have a ministry there where we would.
Oh,
Ministries in the church, but you're talking about something, and I, as a seasoned member here and newly on the vestry, realized that I need to get a little more involved, and I don't even know where to begin. But a ministry fair of what outreach opportunities there are might be a way to do that. All in one room. Anybody who's involved in an outreach ministry could just explain what they do, or just kind of have stations and you can go from one to one. I agree with you. I just don't know enough about, yeah.
Listen,
Sorry if I think you can help with what you were saying, Gail, too, of like, we have been doing some things like the Wednesday group that are kind of like cognitive. It's like, oh, we're reading books together, but if we could do more wing things too, and combining like reading and talking, but also like doing stuff, but like there's probably so many people, it's hard to kind of know where to start, and we could make lots of new connections and like start new things, but there's so many things happening already, and like if we did go and find out what everybody is doing, then more people could kind of like partner with people doing things, and also like connecting with
babies.
other parts of the community and not having everything restart from square one.
Thank you, Paul.
Just to piggyback on that, I think a very simple idea is to have on the website a list of resource people on each justice issue that we're involved with. That's all it would take. And all that means is that they'd be willing to have conversations. But I wanted to make another suggestion, because implicit in so much of what has been talked about is the fact that it's actually having relationships with people outside our community who are marginalized in one way. That's where the transformation happens. And I was suggesting before, and then let's bring back those stories of relationship. Another thing I think that could be very powerful for us is if we organize one or more pilgrimages, where we would make a commitment. I know when I went to see the Museum of African American History and Culture in DC, it was just a transformational experience. And, you know, so why couldn't we get a bus and bring 20 people down who wanted to. But, and then have those people come back and really report to the larger community, but, you know, there are wonderful places close, and there are some places a little farther, you know, in Canada, but I think if we had a kind of a regular program of a couple of those a year, it could really be an engine that keeps on encouraging us and building closer relationships around justice.
We flagged the pilgrimage down to Montgomery, Selma, Birmingham as another.
Yes.
I've heard that popping a few times. So.
Yes.
And the
So,
diocese.
first Sharon, then you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, all of your ideas are just astounding, so, but I have one low hanging fruit, I think. Julie Hughes, who's a historian in Wilton, she's done a lot on Norwalk. And I spoke to her over the weekend, and she would love to come and share her research about people from St. Paul's that she knows were enslaved in that kind of thing. So that's a past history learning. But what I learned in St. Matthew, nobody wanted to talk about race at all. Was that they were really interested in history and all of that kind of stuff, and their eyes were totally opened, and they just ate it up, and it really opened up conversations with people who did not want to have a conversation. So it was really helpful, and she's so amazing.
Yeah.
She's my book,
Great.
but she's
Say her name again.
Julie Hughes.
Julie Hughes. Okay.
And she told me she would love to go. Yeah.
So I spent again the morning, two other names, Stephanie Thomas, who's the Secretary of State. She would come and talk to us in a second. Yeah. And Dominique Johnson, who is now a state rep, who was on the common council, would come in a second as well. Who's not a person of color, but certainly cares. She's an activist and cares about all of the issues that. Stephanie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. You
No,
had,
I was just gonna say, you know, another low hanging fruit is pastoral care. Because I think of, you know, before we were going to Wilton, we were going to a number of nursing homes. That has kind of died since COVID. And at Wilton in particular, one time we were the only group going in. So all these other, we would go to give communion there. And Joyce used to be the person doing it. She would, you know, give a little sermon that just, you know, set the groundwork. But it gave us community and it gave them community with us, even though they may not necessarily have been, you know, members of this parish, but they really looked forward to us going there. So that's another low hanging fruit that can be looked at again post-COVID.
thank you, Bethany.
I would learn, this is kind of learning and learn how to use our voice as a faith community to kind of advocate for whatever issue we feel drawn to. And that's why I loved what was coming up earlier about kind of the individual directory of these people who are involved in what, because that is a way for people to engage with their own individual passions, but then for us to identify it on a congregation-wide level and learn how to,
Like a practice and how to advocate.
yeah, how to organize and advocate as a faith community. Learning how to do it and then also doing it.
Yeah, thank you for flagging those two things together. Anthony, you'll speak more articulately than I do, so I'm going to just say something and then toss the ball to you about prioritizing and how prioritization doesn't mean you don't care about the things that don't make the list, but it's this difference between this kind of collective action, like St. Paul's is picking these three things to do this year and the next year, but that what we don't want to be signaling is well, and the rest of them, you know, they're just X'd off the list.
I was, you know, we're having a conversation about the same thing, community or organizing work I've been done. And now, and organizers are really kind of, what would you call it? A really, I don't want to overuse the word, but a really organized way of choosing what campaign, right? That they're going to put their organization's resources behind, but they want to do so by, you know, giving the power to the community that they are advocating for to choose that campaign. And, but there's obviously usually a lot of issues affecting a community. And they usually also have very limited resources, and in a given legislative session, you can't get every bill passed, and there may not be an opportunity to pass every bill. So really kind of, studying what to pursue and what not to pursue, but the way community organizers typically handle it is having these listening campaigns where they go and sit down with everyone they can in a community one-on-one and listen to them and listen to what is affecting them most in their life, and what their biggest concerns are, and really look at each of those conversations as an individual but important data point, and then collecting all of those conversations together and looking at the commonalities, right? And what topic came up the most, and what was kind of lifted up among the most people in that group as the something that affected them the most, and that they agreed on would be a good thing to advocate for at that time with the resources that were available. And it doesn't necessarily mean that is the most important topic, or that the other issues are not important, but sometimes also just means that that is the issue that people are ready to support at that time, right? Because sometimes we're talking about political topics that not everyone's ready to support reform in a certain area, and that requires more conversations and more education. So it's also a way of measuring, kind of taking the temperature of what a community is ready for in terms of a campaign to get behind.
Some of that is what's happening now, but then it's clearly, if we were to say St. Paul is going to put money and resources behind several things, we'd have to do a deeper, wider kind of listening. But this is the beginning of that. We're starting to see what are the things that are percolating, identifying what people are individually engaged in already, is going to get us closer to that.
So you would expect me to send in what we talked about tonight, just to get some more response from the larger church?
I don't know how we'll do it, but that's, what tonight we're, what will come out of tonight. So just a little bit of a pivot to kind of what's next. Look what's on the wall. That's when it's a blue sky meeting can start to feel heavy. We'd love to do all of it. And by now, I think we know post-COVID, there are no pixies in the closet, It's Marcia and me who are the folks who are employed to do more than music. You've got so we can convene and administer and cajole and encourage, but it's what's in this room. It's we have the 30 people who are with Ranjit. It's us. So we'll figure out how to do that and engage more people. I mean, this is a little bit more than the 20% doing 80% of the work, but just know that the fact that you're here, you can start to ponder, okay, where do I want to commit myself? How do I want to commit myself? Well, one of these early notepads, Gail said, I would like to have a group that is, race and social justice group from St. Paul. And guess what? We already do. And Gail's been out. She was the one who really kind of got me out the blocks saying, if we don't have a group within St. Paul's and from St. Paul to coordinate this work, it's just whack-a-mole. It's just nothing. There is no constellation. It's just stuff. So we started a group that hasn't had a name till now, but it will, going forward, we're going to call it the Racial Justice. Going to match it to the diocese, the Racial Justice and Reconciliation Committee. It's just a boring name, but this is what does the work. This is what has brought us Sacred Ground and Juneteenth and the History Project. So it's already active, but it is the place where all of these ideas will start getting wrapped out. Now, that group is only about 4 or 5 people. So it needs to be 8 or 9 people, and each one of those people needs to be somebody who's actually doing a piece of the work. And that can happen, but it, wanting to kind of signal, you may start to feel that call to say, yeah, I actually want to be part of taking this and turning it into action. You may be somebody who said, I just want to, I'm an action person. I just want to be out there doing something. Start pondering what it is that you feel called to do. It will rise up and we'll not stop talking about it. And one thing you can be sure of is that we won't say, oh yeah, that's race and social, racial reconciliation and justice. I remember when we talked about that, but we're not. I think the fire's lit, so it's our work to collectively keep it going. I got one more thing I want us to do tonight, and I wanted to end around 8. So the first thing I want to do is put an ellipsis on this, not a period. You're gonna have more ideas tonight. You're gonna be thinking of stuff. Just send them in. Send them to Marcia, send them to me. We'll collect them, we'll use them, we'll transcribe this. And yeah, if you can put those 2 on the wall, I am gonna, when I was in the monastery, we did some really kind of deep dive development work on ourselves. It was intense. It was Tavistock Institute. And we just rolled our eyes every time she pulled these out, and finally just said, "Oh, more fun with dots."
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
I have dots. Everybody's going to get 6 dots. It's a lot. I know. Usually you only get 3 dots. This is really generous to go all the way to 6. So my invitation to you is this: not to put the dots on things you think someone should do, but to put dots on something that you think, I care enough about this to get involved in this in some way. This is not, we're not winnowing. We're not, there's no decisions being made. We're not gonna, these dots aren't gonna decide anything, but it'll be for us to collectively say, oh, yeah, there's suddenly there's a cluster there. There's some patterns emerging, or look, it's just all over, we care about everything. So I don't know what's gonna happen. We'll see. So my invitation is to we'll pass these around, and while, yes, go. Pass them out. Don't overthink it. Just pass along these things and stick it where you feel a magnetic attraction, or maybe it even scares you, but you're curious or whatever. Is that clear enough?
I'll read that.
So let's do that relatively mindfully. Let's actually keep some, functional silence, not strict silence, but this isn't a chance to break into coffee hour. We'll do that after. Just give some contemplative space for 3 minutes and then take a look. I don't even think we need to come back and sit down. I'll close this off in prayer. And folks online, you can just type in the chat whatever you heard, or Charlene, I see your hands is up. Is that for now or for before?
Just a very quick thing, which is very mundane. And I know there is a history with that bad word of directory, but there should be a way for people within the parish to be in touch with each other. And whatever that is, I don't know what it is, but it needs to exist in order for this to flourish.
Yes. Thank you. But we'll put that on the newsprint, and we'll figure that one out. It's a bugaboo. Right. So mindful. Have fun with thoughts.
We need a directory. Something on the line.
And again, you can write anything you want in the chat with your name. We'll catch it and transcribe it.
At some point, can we like?
Oh my goodness, yes.
And also just thank everyone. I'm Charlene and Frederica. I'm gonna send them individual copies, right? But sometimes they are.
You can actually see them. Yeah, you
They're
can
beautiful.
see a picture of it. It's different than seeing the thing
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
Great.
So at some point,
Yeah.
when we
Don't
get
let-
the person
yeah.
here one.
Why don't you
And then-
actually
Put it on.
Well, yeah, put on their chairs while they're not looking,
Uh,
and then make sure you get your dots.
okay, yes.
Here, I'll help you.
All right.
And Daniel, all the chairs can fit over on those two things. All the chairs can go back.
Yes. As you've placed your dots, just walk and notice, read, look where there's clusters. Notice what you notice and then come back and sit and we'll just have a 2-minute reflection back on what you noticed there and we're halfway away.
Yeah.
So as you're sticking your final dots, those of you who are finished, you can see from there. What are you noticing? Where are you seeing clusters?
No, I didn't think about it. One of the sad things is where there are already part of some of those.
Yeah, what's already going. Well, that's part of the next work, I think, is to say, so on that sheet, it says. Some of the questions we'll be asking next are what resources and gifts do we have for this project? What additional training and resources might we need? What relationships do we have? What new relationships will we need? So that's part 2. So
You're welcome.
let me pull your attention back to the whole.